I grew up in Hoosick Falls my entire life. I bought a house 6 years ago. I was actually on the village board prior. Um, but how all this started is that I guess we're a pretty tight knit family. And my dad worked in the factory and he drove a school bus concurrently for 32 years. And he was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 2010. He actually had his kidney out first, the first surgery he had the day my son was born. So my dad came out of surgery. We went upstairs and had our son. And then, he was good for about a year and came back in June of 2012, and he passed away in February of 2013. So it was pretty quick when he came back the second time. As I made a lot of the decisions on where to go with kind of the process and what to do with that. So I kind of, questioned myself a little bit about what happened in the beginning. But then a local teacher passed away in January 2014. And there was always kind of a thought in our village that there was a lot of cancer. So I decided to look into it a little bit, see if there was anything with it. And people always assumed, there's something in the water. It must be, right, with all this cancer that we have. So I looked at Oak Mitsui first, and on their list, they kind of have all the zines that are already on the tested list. And then so my dad worked at St. Gobain. I looked at St. Gobain, and it was basic Google search, Teflon and cancer. And what came up was the C8 science panel in DuPont. And when you look at the science panel, it's the first one on the list is kidney cancer. So obviously, I took that a little bit more personal at that point. So I started reading. I probably read about 2 hours a night. A couple months into it, I thought there was enough information to forward it along to Dr. Martinez to see if he thought there was anything to it. And that was probably probably around April or May, somewhere in that area. And, he finally got around to reading it, which he's pretty busy with being, the physician in our town. And he thought there was enough information there to at least move forward a little bit. So we contacted the mayor in about August and said, is there any way that this could be tested for PFOA? And he contacted the head of the water department. I'm not sure if he contacted the Department of Health at that time or not. So what happened is that they couldn't test for it, or they weren't willing to test for it at that time.
It was an unregulated substance.
Yeah, unregulated contaminant, unable to test for it, really. There wasn't anything out there unless there was a community, I think, of 10,000 and plus, or could be a test for it at that point in time.
This was August of
2014.
14. Okay.
Yep. At that point, I spent a lot of time reading, and I really felt strongly that there really was something to it. So I looked up the lab that handled DuPont's testing, Axis Lab out of British Columbia, and requested a kit to be sent. So I contacted him. It came on Labor Day 2014. And I called the head of the water department, told them that we had the kit, it arrived, and that they would like 2 raw samples and then 2 chlorinated samples, so finished. And when he came up, he goes, you can't have them. I said, okay. And why is that? Private citizens don't have access to raw water. So I let that go. I didn't think there was that big of a deal with it. It was a little bit disheartening, don't get me wrong, but
You wanted to have both, right?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go along with what they said to do. So I took a sample out of my sink and my mother's sink, and then I went over to the local McDonald's and the local dollar store, and I took one from there because I knew that they were on private wells outside of the village. Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, the results came back, and I think my house tested at 480 parts per trillion, and my mother's was 560 at that time. So we contacted the mayor again with Dr. Martinez. We went down and talked to him and said, we have a problem. The water came back, and sure enough, it tested positive for PFOA at these levels. We really need to move forward and see what can be done on your part now. At that point, there was a kind of what would it be? An initiative in town called Hoosick Rising. And, there was a building being built on the corner with the state grant. And, there was really kind of an economic push in downtown. And his opinion on that was that, we couldn't have a knee-jerk reaction, which I understood. Maybe I've taken a couple of steps back over the last few months and really looked to see where we could have done things differently to maybe improve this process. And I do somewhat understand that in the beginning. But then they sent out their first sample, October 2014. They received their test results back October 16th. I remember that pretty well. Me and Marcus, Dr. Martinez, went down and met with them again. Their results mirrored my results. So, at that point, we knew we had a serious problem. There's two sets of results there showing these levels. And, at that point, kind of the process started a little bit more of being more vocal. We started going to the meetings. The one issue we ran into was that Dr. Martinez was actually diagnosed with his carcinoid cancer, neuroendocrine, 6 days after those results came in. So he started chemotherapy and had, a couple surgeries in between. But he was still very active along the process, and he kept with it, which is kind of says a lot about his character and who he is. It's obviously one of the reasons why he's so loved in our community. At that point, we're probably November, December, we really weren't seeing much progress out of the board. We reached out to Dave Engel, environmental attorney out of Albany, told him our scenario, where we were at with it. He went to, I think, a couple of meetings, reached out to the mayor. They weren't really willing to get behind us. In about July 2015 now, we went to all these meetings, tried to figure out where the progress was. And, it was difficult, I think, for us to kind of push forward and go to different agencies on our own, because it's a small community. So you really don't want to step on a lot of toes. Everybody knows everybody. And you do realize that these aren't full-time jobs that the mayor has or the rest of the board. So they're learning along the process as well. But the contacts with the Department of Health that they had, that didn't seem to really go that well. As you could tell probably on the timeline with everything, the EPA and the Department of Health really weren't on the same page with each other at all. You kind of wonder where the multiple levels of government, being a small town, where do you go with it? We thought we had the right people lined up with Marcus and Dave being environmental attorney. It just seemed to take a really long time to see the progress that we wanted. So we put together a corporation, Healthy Hoosick Water, in about, I think that was in July, because you couldn't seek legal action as an individual to get the water system fixed as a whole. You had to incorporate in order to go those legal avenues, and that was all under Dave's advisement of looking into the route that we should go. And he also worked along with Rob Balot around this process too, and he's really the pioneer on the legal side of things, because he worked on the DuPont case in West Virginia and Ohio. So there's been conversations along with him this whole process as well. As there's 8 other states, I think, that have the regulation in place. We just weren't one of them.
To test for this, or
and they're regulated, so they have the number out there. There's a couple different numbers, and it seems to be going lower and lower. The more studies that come out, the worse it seems to get. So we incorporated in July. There was a couple letters sent out. You started to see a little bit of a return at that point in time. Then the EPA finally got involved with Judith. And she was really aggressive in the beginning when I think she first became aware of really the severity of our situation. It's still a little bit confusing on who knew what when.
Well, that seems to be the big question.
Yeah, and I really wish I had an answer for you on that one too. Really, nobody seems to know exactly when the contacts were made and how they were made, which is kind of unfortunate of how these lines got crossed, because I think people really were drinking this water for an additional 14 months when they really didn't need to be. I think the damage, kind of how it works in us and my age group, is that we understand that we could monitor for this going forward, the illnesses that are related to it, but The children that were conceived or born along those time, in those 14 months really didn't need to be exposed, which is kind of the disappointing part. But it was also good to see, the local students at the high school get involved as well, to show that they really cared about their community. And Mr. Facine, the superintendent, has done a great job over there. He supported us the entire time, along with Marcus, as he's the physician for the school.
I'll just ask you, are you satisfied with the progress that's being done now? Or is it too little too late?
That's I don't know if I have a really great answer for you on that one. It's a tough answer because I know how much work we put into this along the way. 2 years is really how long I've been invested into this at this point. It's great to see the action now, but disappointed that it couldn't have happened sooner. We're kind of on the heels of Flint. And I almost feel like this is a little bit of damage control, to be honest with you, which if that's what it takes to get our community the help it needs, then so be it. That's fine. You just kind of wish it went a little bit smoother in the entire process.
What are your biggest frustrations with what's happened in your village?
I think probably the lack of transparency from the beginning. We really didn't know. We kept pushing the issue, and we really didn't know what stage we were at and when. And who was contacted, who knew, and why wasn't there a quicker response? It doesn't seem like the EPA was aware until, really Judas got involved, I think, in the middle of November. But even at the November meeting that we had at the church, the Department of Health was handing out a letter that had, water saying that it's safe at 50,000 parts per trillion. Yet, on the other hand, we have the other piece of paper on the other hand that says, don't drink with it, don't cook with it, from the EPA.
It seems like there were a lot of contradictions early on and even into late last year.
November, December, yeah. That was hard, I think, for the people in the community, because it's like, who do you believe? Which one's right? Getting everybody on the same page now is great. And I think that really took the governor stepping in to do that, which is unfortunate, because I realize where we are kind of on the overall scheme of things. We're a small community. We don't have a whole lot of votes. But in a situation like this, you hate to think that it's political, but it seems that it's really gone the political road, which is unfortunate, because I don't think there was any intentions on any of our parts as individuals that were involved in this in the beginning, to cause any harm to the village or anything on the political side. It just went down a road that we didn't expect, and I also didn't expect to be sitting here doing an interview with you either when I started this.
Yeah. Well, what were you setting out to do?
Fix the water for the community. My dad, cared a lot about the community, drove a school bus for 32 years, sat on the board. That was a goal. He didn't die the best death. It was hard on our family. Sorry. So really trying to prevent that going forward was the goal, and that was really the only goal.
How long did you work at the factory?
32 years.
Okay, so that was his career. He worked at that in McCaffrey Street?
Yep. No, he was kind of jumped around. Yeah, it was kind of Liberty. A lot of the employees there would go to the different buildings.
Because they had like Liberty Street and McCaffrey and
Yep, and there was a few other ones back in the day too.
Did he handle any of this material?
Sure, they all did. Anybody who was in the plant handled it. The PTFE powder comes in a powder form. It's. I don't think the corporation was 100% at fault here at all. I think it's one of these things where it's a world we live in. There's a lot of chemicals, 60,000 unregulated chemicals that are out there right now, and for the Department of Health or the EPA to be able to regulate all of them, virtually impossible. The frustrating part on this one is that, our team isn't Rob Bellot's team who created the the whole legal aspect of this in DuPont in West Virginia and Ohio. So we didn't recreate the wheel here. It was already established. We knew that it was bad. Being unregulated is one thing, but when does common sense and science come together for the for the betterment of the community? It seems like that would have been the easiest route to go. The wells are 400 yards away from the plant. It wasn't, a big revelation last week when they came out and said that Honeywell and St. Gobain are responsible for the contamination. Obviously, that plant has been open, I think, since the mid-50s, going back to Dodge and Allied, and you knew where it came from. It was just a step that know that you have to go through to get to where we are today.
Now that the EPA is even looking at the soil, which suggests it was in the air, what does that make you think?
Well, my thought process this whole time was we knew that it was in the air. The other states with, DuPont, Minnesota, with 3M, California, they all produced PTFE. We used it. So the contamination for us was, I think, slower. DuPont in Minnesota, I think it was quicker because they produced it, so it kind of was there. And they were bigger factories as well. Ours is just that, for so long, and some of the stories you hear about cleaning outside and things like that, it's just kind of everything is going to funnel down. And our aquifer in the village is the lowest place in the village, so everything's running to that. So it was just kind of a matter of time before I got there.
What's the biggest question in your mind right now when it comes to this contamination?
The biggest question is are we going to be able to find the clean water source going forward? How long is it going to be to get that into play? What are the long-term ramifications for this, for our community, and how now can the governor and the government kind of step up, and we're going to be affected economically from the Superfund label. It kind of is what it is. It's a stigma that's going to be with it. We have a great school that we can try to capitalize on with all the great things that Mr. Facine's doing. We all saw the news conference. You guys were there. We couldn't be any prouder of the kids in Hoosick Falls. So we have a great community, and I think we're very proud of who we are. This is going to sting. It's hard for people that are trying to retire to sell their homes. The home values are obviously going to be down. This has been on every news channel, so who's going to want to move to Hoosick Falls and say, it's a place with the tainted water, the poison water.
Brings the future of your village into question.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the hard part, I think, for me personally. When we did the article, or when I did the article with the Times-Union, I knew what the thoughts were going to be coming out of that. People were going to be worried about their jobs at St. Gobain. And you understand that, and I understand that, both my parents worked there. Me, my brother, and my sister, I think we had good childhoods raised from the factory work that they had. It just, if they were to pull out of Hoosick Falls, it would be devastating for the economy.
I was like, you don't want this issue to be the death of your town.
Correct. That's the hope.
Concerns about how long the contamination may have been going on? Does that even compute at this point?
I think that's it's going to be tough to determine. I think it's going back probably 30, 40 years. It's just the longevity of the way this chemical works that, it's soluble. It's getting down to the aquifer. I'm pretty confident that there's really not going to be much found in the soil at the Little League fields. Just from the 5 wells that were tested around St. Gobain, the soil samples came back okay, and that's even further away. So I think that them saying that they haven't used a chemical there since 2006, I think that,
Or 3 or 4, they told us, yeah.
Yeah, so, that number is still up in the air, questionable as well. But I think that we're heading in the right direction. It's just a frustrating process, 2 years.
When people could have stopped drinking the water
Yeah, you
A
know,
year and a half ago.
yeah. Um, Basically, the confirmation came in pretty much September. If you want to go off of the village's results, that would be when it would have stopped instead of going, you know, the additional
Right?
months.
August, September, still in that area.
Yeah.
Anything else that you can think of? I know. What are the? I mean, you live there still, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, what's the mood in your village?
I think they're scared. People are scared. You know, for the safety of their children. But then there's the other side of things where people are scared financially. They're scared for their jobs. They're scared about the home values that are obviously decreased because of this. Um, you know, the overall attitude I think has been boosted by what the kids did in the assembly, and the governor stepping up and releasing the $10 million. I think that was good for really a good boost for confidence in moving forward. But there's still obstacles that are going to be need to overcome along the way, and I'm hoping, you know, that all the entities that were involved with the Department of Health, the EPA, the DEC, the governor, that everybody could be on the same page moving forward, because it really seems like that was the stumbling block that really occurred from the beginning was, why can't we seem to get on the same page? You know, why are we getting these different numbers from different agencies? You know, that's the part that was really probably the most frustrating along the entire process.
Are you a public enemy or a public hero in your village?
Um,
How are you being treated since all of this happened?
I think you probably would need a census on that one. You know, most of the people have been positive, and I understand the people who are not happy about it. I get the financial part of it. That's why, you know, people think that this was financially driven for personal gain for me, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. If that was the case, I would have had a for sale sign out in front of my house before I went to the Times Union, and my mother, my brother, and my sister would have too. But we're not going anywhere. You know, I do the commute down here daily, and I'm planning on my son starting kindergarten next year. So, you know, you're never gonna make everybody happy no matter what you do. I think though, for me to be able to look in the mirror every day, and be okay with it, this is the only route that was available to go, to get to the progress that we needed, or at least that I thought we needed, to be at, you know, for the safety of the community.
In your mind, is anyone at fault for how this was handled?
I don't think you could put individual blame on one person or anybody like that. I think that there's a lot of chemicals. You know, it's a mill town. You know, the perception that's unfortunate is that in a mill town that lifestyles are living a little bit differently and a little bit harder, smokers and drinkers, and I think that kind of maybe gets caught up in some of these chemicals. You know, the companies are able to push the lifestyle as a blame rather than possible, you know, contaminants in the workforce, you know, in the industry that they're working in.
When you see nearby villages and towns start to test for this, what do you think? Do you think that's an encouraging sign of
Yeah.
awareness, or what's your
Yeah,
take?
you know, I think that it probably opened a lot of people's eyes and being scared, you know, and I'm sure that everybody can, not because of these chemicals, but cancer is, you know, the number one killer, I believe. So if you see a chemical out there and you see something repeatedly on the news that's saying this is bad, and they're in small towns like us, that they want to be safe too, you know, so why not check? If you have the availability to check and you know, why not test for it? You know, just to give your community that sense of feeling safe, I think is a pretty important thing.
10 years from now, when we look back on this, hopefully it's concluded at
Mm-hmm.
that point. What do you want people to know about what happened here and you?
Um, Hopefully we're a thriving community at that time, you know, and that this is a speed bump for us to continue to move forward as a community, as a school. We have great things happening there. I think that Mayor Borge has been really progressive with his thoughts on, Hoosick Rising. I think the timing was probably pretty poor with the water and everything else that was going on. So that was unfortunate for him and the rest of the board to kind of be thrown into this mix. But I think that with the help from the school, and you're seeing other educational institutions like RPI get involved now as well, that hopefully we could lead by example and really move forward as a community and say, set precedent of how to do it the right way going forward instead of looking back the whole way.